Protecting Kostyantynivka, Slovyansk, and the Donetsk region as a whole is currently one of the main tasks that the president discussed with Commander-in-Chief Tripathi. These regions are currently in need of protection, and Zelenskyy assured the state leadership has an understanding of how to strengthen this front line. He thanked all the units that are carrying out combat missions, repelling Russian assaults, eliminating so-called infiltrations, and consistently destroying the occupiers. The situation on the eastern sections of the front is consistently difficult. The Russians are replenishing their troops with Ukrainian prisoners of war and are stating this openly. The Institute for the Study of War writes that the forced involvement of prisoners in combat operations on the side of the occupying state violates the Geneva Convention and is considered a war crime. However, the Russian Federation disregards this. Russian soldiers continue to break through on the Pokrovsk and Kostyantynivka directions of the front. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are also having successes. The Signum Unmanned Systems Battalion announced that they have established fire control over an important logistics route of the occupiers. This refers to the so-called land corridor to Crimea. This is the section from Mariupol to Chongar. According to the unit, the enemy used this transport artery to supply ammunition, fuel, and to transfer personnel. However, this zone has now become a high-risk area for the occupying forces, although the Kremlin traditionally claims that they have everything under control. Another patch of wild berries caught fire this morning in Russia. This time, Ukrainian drones visited a warehouse of a well-known occupier marketplace in Yekaterinburg, which is about 2,000 kilometers from the front line. Locals first recorded the drones flying over, then explosions, and later columns of smoke that could be seen all around. The local governor confirmed the UAV attack and warned that restrictions on mobile communications and the internet might be introduced in the city. Obviously, to prevent Russians from spreading videos of the Wildberries warehouse engulfed in flames. Meanwhile, videos from the Russian city of Bryansk are circulating online. A thick column of black smoke is rising over the city. Preliminary reports indicate a fire in the warehouse area. Temporarily occupied Crimea also came under attack by Ukrainian drones, including naval ones. A fire broke out in Yalta. The fires being reported in the port area. Vacationers had to be evacuated from the embankment. It might attack NATO without waiting for the end of the war in Ukraine. American intelligence has warned about Putin's likely plans. The intelligence officers shared their observations with the Wall Street Journal. The master of the Kremlin may try to test NATO's resolve and strike one of the alliance's countries in the coming years. Possible scenarios of aggression, from a cyber attack to a small-scale ground invasion. Previously, Washington believed that Putin would not provoke NATO while he is waging war in Ukraine. However, at the beginning of the year, forecasts changed as it seems that the Russian army is finding itself in an increasingly difficult position in Ukraine, and the Kremlin dictator is under pressure, which demands that he secure a victory. Therefore, Putin may try to attack a NATO member country, and his goal in that case would be to split the alliance. Russia plans to increase ballistic missile strikes on Ukraine. As reported by the main Directorate of Intelligence, it is preparing to reinforce with a new missile unit from the DPRK. Ukraine, meanwhile, has been left defenseless due to delays in the supply of interceptor missiles for Patriot systems, the only ones capable of effectively shooting down ballistic missiles. How can this missile terror be countered? On social media, after the Russian attack on August 5th, many people were asking, why do the Russian launchers, from which Iskanders, S-300s, and Zircons are fired at Ukraine, feel completely safe right near Ukraine's borders? As Maria Vasilyeva found out, hunting for the launchers is underway, but it is neither systematic nor a priority. Although in conditions where interceptors are unavailable or scarce, this could have significantly reduced the threat.
On social media, Russians are posting videos in which they boast about simultaneously launching several ballistic missiles at Ukraine from the near border area. Most often, this is Klintsy, Bryansk Oblast, 50 kilometers from the border, as well as the border regions of Kursk and Belgorod Oblasts. Rear bases for Russian missile troops are located there, and the flight time for missiles from the border area to Kyiv is 5 to 7 minutes. And this is the result of those launches on August 5th against Kyiv and the Kyiv region. 17 people killed, 50 wounded, destroyed enterprises, logistics facilities, and warehouses of 12.5 large companies. Out of 28 ballistic and anti-ship missiles, not a single one was shot down. Patriot systems are sitting empty because after the start of the Trump campaign in Iran, the US alone spent 1,000 PAC-3 missiles in just a month. Not to mention that these missiles were also used to fend off Iranian attacks in Persian Gulf countries, including against Shaheds. This wastefulness led to a shortage of anti-ballistic interceptors worldwide. For Ukraine, they were literally being hunted down one by one. President Zelenskyy tried to negotiate a so-called winter package of 300 PAC-3s with Trump. Back then, Trump promised to try to help, but after the devastating attack on Kyiv, he said that the US needed those missiles itself. We need missiles too. Biden had already transferred a great many of them to Ukraine as it was.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy suggested that there might be not only objective reasons for the supply delays, but political ones as well. In his opinion, this could be a form of hidden pressure on Ukraine's negotiating position.
Since the beginning of 2026, Ukraine has started receiving about 3 times less anti-ballistic missiles. Understanding such a large deficit, and I don't know if there are other reasons besides the Middle East. Maybe these are also political steps to make Ukraine, let's say, more amenable. Yeah, in my opinion, that's definitely part of it, right?
Russia has long sensed this weak spot and is now focused on striking Kyiv only with ballistics, leaving cruise missiles for massive attacks on the regions and Shaheds as an auxiliary tool. Sanctions cannot stop the production of Iskanders. They are 100% made of Russian components, explains presidential advisor Serhiy Flash Beskrestanov. And then there are the anti-ship Zircons and the S-300 and S-400 anti-aircraft missiles, which the Russians have adapted for shelling ground targets. They may not hit accurately, but they'll do for terror.
They have a stockpile of somewhere around a few hundred ballistic missiles. But I've already said that they're also producing 100 missiles every month. That's why I'm saying it's quite possible that the Russians could be using up to 100 ballistic missiles against us every month.
But additionally, the Russians are planning to deploy a missile unit from the DPRK near the border with Ukraine in the Voronezh region this autumn. Russia has already received a new batch of 40 North Korean missiles from Pyongyang, similar to the Iskanders. Kim Jong-un has also sent his own missile operators. In total, there should be about 100 of them in the new missile unit. All of this together makes hopes for some kind of peaceful settlement a dangerous illusion. Putin is clearly preparing to intensify the attack, not to retreat. Winter is near, and all the efforts and billions of euros spent preparing for it will be in vain if a way to counter Russian ballistics is not found. After the devastating attack on the Kyiv region, the Ukrainian OSINT community raised the question, why can't we destroy Russian launch sites in the border areas? After all, the grids from which the launches are conducted are known.
In some cases, these locations are known. In some cases, through various markers, we understand the area where the launchers will be operating, and we can pinpoint their location during an attack. So, in fact, if reconnaissance wings are constantly hovering over the area, and, several different reconnaissance wings are constantly hovering over the area and also acting as relays for our strike assets, then it is all possible to calculate. Even if we calculate this during an attack, see the launches there, from the battery, they still launch in several waves. So, in fact, this will also be effective destruction even during the attack.
Some military personnel note that this task is difficult because Ukraine is critically dependent on Starlink, which, by Elon Musk's decision, does not work over Russian territory, and therefore Ukrainian drones successfully hit large stationary targets. But they can't destroy launchers that quickly move from place to place without high-quality communication.
It moves along some forest roads and tries to do it in such a way that satellites cannot track it. And then the deployment of the Iskander happens very quickly. Then the launch. The Iskander fires and then flees the position. For this, you need eyes in the sky, satellite imagery. So the task is very, very difficult. Catching an Iskander on the move or near a position where it is deploying and attacking is difficult.
But difficult does not mean impossible. On May 30th, the Unmanned Systems Forces struck an Iskander launcher in Taganrog that was parked in a tree line. Last December, the Black Forest artillery reconnaissance fighters hit an S-400 launcher while it was on the move, driving down the road. There are other successful strikes, but for them to become systematic, more resources, effort, and coordination between different units are necessary.
We were able to hit S-300s in Belgorod that were shelling Kharkov and a Uragan in Belgorod. So we were able to do all that, but for some reason it's not working out with the Iskanders. We consider working on the Iskander launchers to be unrealistic. Well, this is so complicated, let's not even try. Therefore, it seems to me that we are giving up on the idea before we have even tried to fully implement it.
The Freya anti-ballistic system, which the Ukrainian company Firepoint is creating together with Europeans, will be able to shoot down the first Russian missile at best next year. And that would be a miracle, because the development of such anti-missile systems usually takes about 10 years. 2 Ukrainian ballistic missiles, the F-9 and the Sapsin, are currently undergoing final testing, but launching mass production will also take time. Time that will have to be spent defending in conditions where PAC-3 missiles for Patriot systems will either be very scarce or non-existent. So it seems the choice is this: either hunt down and destroy the Iskander launchers, or watch as Russian ballistics unimpededly destroy human lives, energy, production, residential buildings, and critical infrastructure, without which life in the city will become impossible. Maria Vasilieva, TSN, 1+1 United News Marathon.
The U.S. Senate has approved Lindsey Graham's bill regarding hellish sanctions against Russia and Iran. Now, the document will be sent to the House of Representatives for consideration, and then it must still be signed by U.S. President Donald Trump. As a reminder, the bill by the late Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Richard Blumenthal is intended to reduce Moscow's profits from oil and gas sales, as well as to block ways of circumventing sanctions through third countries. At the end of July, the first procedural vote took place in the U.S. Senate, which had been in the works for over 2 years. 86 senators voted in favor. The bill has already been revised twice. Initially, it was softened with the approval of the White House. In the initial version, the bill made it possible to impose tariffs on more than 60 countries that purchase Russian oil and gas. Now, however, it focuses on the 5 largest importers. Furthermore, the first version also provided for a 500% tariff. The new version mentions a rate ranging from 0 to 100%. During the second review, restrictions on Iran and Hezbollah were also added to the bill on sanctions against Russia. The European Union has approved new sanctions against Russia. EU top diplomat Kaja Kallas announced this on the social network X. The new sanctions lists were a response to the recent massive strikes on Ukraine. Kallas noted that every new attack on Ukraine is another reason for Europe to increase pressure on Russia. The new badge of restrictions includes 5 individuals linked to the Russian military-industrial complex. Among them is Ramil Nailovich Batrutinov, General Director of the Serpukhov Metallist plant, which manufactures systems used in the Iskander-M ballistic missile. In addition to him, the General Director of the Krasnoyarsk machine-building plant, Alexander Dukarev, was also sanctioned. The company manufactures ballistic missiles, including those for the Sarmat missile system. Among others are the heads of Russian companies involved in the production of military communication systems, as well as the development of software for UAVs and military space technologies. Their assets will be frozen. Direct or indirect provision of funds or economic resources to them is also prohibited, as is entry into the EU. The new sanctions have already been welcomed by Minister of Foreign Affairs Andrei Sabiha. He announced that every act of Russian terror against the Ukrainian civilian population must have consequences. Zelensky's visit to Serbia, a European country friendly to Moscow. This is the first visit not only since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but also during Zelensky's entire term. The president of Ukraine is scheduled to meet with his Serbian counterpart tomorrow. Alexander Vučić visited Kyiv last month along with other leaders for the Southeast Europe-Ukraine Summit. However, despite aspiring to join the European Union, Serbia has still not joined the sanctions against Russia for the war in Ukraine. Brussels is calling on Serbia to align its foreign policy and finally impose restrictions. However, the Serbian authorities cite their energy dependence on Moscow and traditional ties with it, and do not want to impose sanctions. For example, Vučić did not sign the joint declaration of the July summit on continuing political, military, financial, and security support for Ukraine and increasing pressure on Russia.